Film Club.
Thank you very much for joining us for another episode of Film Club. I am one of your hosts, Andy Harrison. With me, as always, it's Andy Donaldson.
Hello.
Every week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us. We dive into some of cinema's best and come back here to talk it out. And Andy, this week we absolutely have one of cinema's best in Harakiri.
Harakiri is a story about a an ex-samurai who has a family, and the story, he comes to a place and he wants to perform Harakiri, which is the Japanese term for the samurai self-sacrifice. You die an honourable death. When he goes into this dojo, this kind of castle, they say, well, we've had people come here before and they just come in here, they want to get a bit of money to help them on, so we just called them out and made sure that they performed Harakiri. And then this lone samurai tells the story of, oh, actually, I know that person. Oh, actually, this is my vengeance.
Directed by Masaki Kobayashi. This is definitely the first film that we've done here on the channel from him. And unless I'm forgetting something, I think this is the first film I've seen from him. And my initial reactions coming out of Harakiri, how the hell have I not seen this before?
I didn't like it.
You didn't like it?
Nah, but mess with it.
Holy crap.
I fucking loved it, mate. I loved it. I sent you a text last
night. My heart stopped for a second.
I think more so for you with your history of kind of older films and classics and, about that time. I'm surprised myself that you haven't seen it. I'm not surprised that I haven't seen it, but I'm bloody well glad that I have seen it.
Mm-hmm. Harakiri's always been on the list for me. It's always been one of those films that people mention. And to be honest, everyone does this where we hear a recommendation, we kind of go, all right, okay, I'll get to it. I'm sure it's not as good as they're saying. This is as good as people are saying. If anybody has recommended to you in the last year, 2 years, 5 years, to go and watch Harakiri, do yourself a favor, sit down and just let this film absolutely absorb you, because that's what it does. But I'm genuinely blown away by this.
It reminded me of, Rashomon. You know how you're hearing these stories of what happened in the instant. Obviously, Rashomon's got a different effect. It's like their version of what happened. Whereas in this case, it's almost looking back at here's my history.
Yeah, so I didn't know at first if that's where they were going with this. I didn't know if we were going to get the Rashomon effect again, and you were going to see this sort of play out of this event happen from multiple points of view. But instead what you get is a very clever use of flashback and of revealing information through flashback. Now, traditionally, flashback is something that's kind of frowned upon for screenwriting. It's seen as lazy. But here, they use flashbacks to basically develop the way in which relationships are going on in the current timeline. Because when you first are introduced to this character and he first turns up, you were initially greeted with this sort of stranger, and what you are assuming is either somebody of a like-minded attempt at sort of profiteering from the situation. Then you're sort of revealed that, well, actually he has a relationship to the guy prior, and then that suddenly alters the way in which these two people are interacting in the current timeline. It intensifies everything. And then when the information continues and you start to build this more fleshed out picture about the samurai's family and his kid and why he was there in the first place and the desperation that's going on in his life. And every single time we're revealing information, we're just heightening the tension and we're heightening the atmosphere.
It's almost like the air of authority switched throughout this film, especially the way that Hanshiro kind of laughs towards the kind of elder guy. And it's there's suddenly this air of authority shifts over and you're like, ooh, like a new player's entered the game. That player is, you're going to get an ass whipping. So,
well, because
isn't it?
He's this rebellious element. They are basically hiding behind this facade, and that facade is the idea of the samurai, and it's the tradition of the samurai.
And he just calls them. It's brilliant.
It's this way of sort of presenting their justification for what they've done through means of tradition and through means of honor. And basically, all he's doing, or all he's trying to do, really, is just undermine that and show it for what it is. And obviously that whole thing is echoed so beautifully in the empty, ornate samurai armor that sits in one of their dojo rooms.
Oh, they're almost like the worship. The other way that they reveal information, especially towards body language and the dojo and everything like that, is the use of cinematography. The way that the camera pans over and has these swooping shots, these amazing edited scenes where they come into a face. These almost these kind of, I don't know what you call them, Andy, when the camera zooms into a point to add effect. I was all about the cinematography of this film. I was blown away. Like considering it's 1962, and I was just thinking these are kind of effects that we see nowadays that we might not take full appreciation for, but back then, it just added everything to the scenes. It added everything to the character and attitude of the scenes.
It's like it's subdued when it needs to be, but also it does not shy away from being like fundamentally theatrical. The moment where they bring back his body, and then the representatives from the house leave, and they just leave his body on the ground, and she goes over and just starts to wail next to it.
That's
and
rough.
The light from the room all goes dark, and we're left with this very intensely dramatic spotlight effect. Like, obviously there's no motivator for that, but it is absolutely perfect for the scene. Just perfect.
The actor himself, Tatsuya Nakadai, who plays, as mentioned, he played Hanshiro. Oh my God, right? I loved, again, we're coming in and seeing this disheveled kind of guy. He doesn't really, it comes across that he doesn't really know where he wants to be. He just wants to perform Harakiri. And then he has that like beady eyes, seen death. He's been there, he's at the end of his life. But as you go through the story, and especially in the flashbacks where you see there's a bit of warmth, there's a bit of love in his eyes, especially, the scenes with his grandkid and everything like that. And as he's starting to reveal his story, and he's saying, for all you samurai out there, listen to my story, that beady-eyedness, that almost like chaotic, animalistic nature that later in the story ends up reverting back to in the samurai scene, in the swords scene, it kind of has a presence of life.
They do some really nice stuff with like the costuming and the makeup on him as well. But he does an absolutely phenomenal job at sort of like portraying that full range. Because you're right, he gets sort of like that sort of peaceful happiness when his kid's young, and then he gets that gleeful sort of grandparent energy when Kingo is born, and then as sort of everything starts to turn, he obviously starts to lose a bit of energy. But you're right, in the very end, or I guess what is our entry to the story, he looks fundamentally broken. He looks like a guy who has seen, like, he knows he's seen basically his entire life gone, and he's in the final hours of staring it down. And then right at the end, when he's actually going through that battle sequence, there's still a little bit of desperation behind his eyes. I
like that because he almost like pre-warns him and says, if you don't let me do this, you will, like, you cornering an animal. Yeah.
And while we're on the subject, so this has, I mentioned at the beginning, it has, I think, 2 of the most incredible action sequences in a samurai film that I've seen. The first is in the field.
Oh, with the samurai, the master swordsman.
Yep, he fights the master swordsman in the field. It's this beautifully choreographed sequence where, in a very clever sense, they're sort of like, they're trading blows, they're building up anticipation and paying off that anticipation. It is archetypically samurai. It's beautiful, it's ornate, it's like transcendent to a legendary status. It's that sort of like epic, and it's kind of shot in a way which is deserved of it. But then on the flip side, you get the scramble at the end. You get the final urging breath of a dying man as he just wants to cause some damage and destruction and pain to those that did so to him. And it's less grand, it's less ornate, it's less legendary, it's in some ways more real. It's not fundamentally real. He does sort of go out in this blaze of glory, but there's a twinge of sadness to the whole thing. And as that fight continues, there's no hope in him coming out heroic. This isn't some sort of Hollywood ending where this incredibly talented samurai fights his way out of dozens of men. You know where it's going. And the joy of it is kind of coming from, I guess, knowing that what he's leaving behind, and it's also coming from the fact that you are watching this beautifully choreographed scene. What I noticed that happens in Harakiri, it's quite the opposite of what happened when we did just 2 weeks ago. We did Yojimbo. What Kurosawa did, he did something that someone like Leone would go on to popularize, the idea that the build up to the fight and also the consequence of the fight, those are the 2 things of interest, and that the actual action is over like very, very quick. It's over in a flash. Whereas here, the action is actually a process. It is something to be engaged in. The action is something which provides a sort of visceral release.
And it's those pauses between the action sequences where they're almost taking a step, that they're edging towards. It reminded me of actually a bit of Yojimbo, where they're trying to go towards each other, stepping the move back. But obviously this has a lot more bravery in it. And then we have the symbolism of it all. I mean, we're going about the film, how he's saying how you lose your top knot, you lose your sword, that's a part of your sword. I mean, we said at the very start of the film, he almost makes them eat their own words. He says that when his son-in-law, who is Motome, dies, and obviously he dies to a bamboo blade, and he's horrified to see that. He says that their reasoning for that is your sword is part of your soul, a samurai's soul. Now, when he has that field of the fight in the field, he chops off the sword. So he has indirectly won that fight. And obviously the other samurai, the master swordsman, is still fighting for his life. He goes into his hut and says that he's gravely ill and he can't get anything. It's a testament to the dojo, the castle's lack of respect for the samurai, traditional samurai rules. What actually therefore happens after is the feudal system, the administration actually say, oh yeah, you handled that really well. All right, here's some power. And they end up actually winning in terms of politically. And it's a bit like, oh fuck, that's really annoying. But we know ourselves on an emotional level that Hanshiro has just absolutely called him out, and maybe hopefully down the line that the descendants of that samurai maybe a bit less hypocritical. I loved the symbolism of that ending. I really did.
Yeah, it's not a film that intends to demonstrate some sort of hyperbolic change in the way in which like Japanese culture can be represented. But what it is this sort of rebellious retort on all of this systematic tradition that these people felt like they were a slave to. And instead it challenges it on a very human level. All he's asking is, when you're implementing these traditions, think of the human element behind it.
Yeah, did you even ask him why he needed to go away for 3 days?
Exactly.
It's such a simple question, and they were just like, nah, sorry.
So there is Harakiri. You can let us know in the comments below what you thought of Harakiri. If you haven't seen it, please go and check it out. But Andy and I will be back once again next week, where we're going to take a look at something slightly different. We're moving away from samurai, and we're going to go over to France because we want to take a look at 400 Blows.
Which is not French samurai, just a heads up.
If only. Oh, Le Samurai. We should watch Le Samurai at some point.
There you go.
Until then, get watching.
Cheers, guys.